right. Welcome to the Aetherica podcast. I am here, Sky Mathis, with my man, the legend himself,
Oh
Ike
boy.
Baker. Hey, Jen, Ike.
Good man. Little hectic today. I am broadcasting from the library of the Asheville Masonic Temple because internet is down at my place.
Kind of
So
cool though. I'm actually kind of happy about it. It's pretty sweet background you got going on there.
yeah, it's real. How are
Uh,
you, dude?
I'm pretty good. Not too bad. I worked in the sun today, so I got to absorb some of that vitamin D3.
Mm.
So that's always a plus. Sometimes it's a little hot, but
Yeah.
yeah. But okay, so today we're gonna do kind of like a Kabbalistic Q&A. I just recently I picked up this book, Godwin's Kabbalistic Encyclopedia by David Godwin. I was kind of just poking through it, kind of highlighted and uh, a few different interesting things I came across and questions I had. So I thought it would be fun for me and you to kind of poke around at some of my questions and you to give your takes and your perspective and inform myself as well as the listeners. So I think this will be fun.
But I just want to preface this by saying, like, even though I've studied this for a long time, I am by no means any match for an encyclopedia. But
No worries.
I'll do my best.
Yeah,
The Kabbalah the Kabbalah gets a little obscure because what we have to remember about the Kabbalah is that there is no single Kabbalah. The Kabbalah is itself a long chain of mystical speculation and contemplation that extends from early rabbis and goes to Christian Kabbalists and goes to modern occultists. And so there's a lot of interpretation, I should say. There's a lot of evolution, and there's a lot of different systems. So it's like it's not something that you can just say, oh, here's what this means. It's like, okay, what is this? What school of Kabbalah are we talking about? So I may have to,
well, that's probably a good
ask.
starting point. Maybe you can kind of just like delineate maybe like Kabbalah with a K versus Kabbalah with a Q versus Kabbalah with a C. Maybe you can kind of just like give the rundown on the a few of the different systems, and then we can go from there.
Yeah. So, right, as you mentioned, there's Kabbalah with a K, there's a Kabbalah with a C, there's a Kabbalah with a Q, and they all denote something very particular when you see them spelled that way. At least for when you are looking at something that is in the know, right? So there's plenty of people online that probably don't understand that differentiation, and so they just kind of spell it however they've read it.
Yeah.
But there's reasons, and Kabbalah with a K. Well, first of all, it comes from the root of the word is Hebrew kibel, which means reception or to receive, and it's kof bet lamed. That's how that word is spelled in Hebrew, and so you have that, and Kabbalah is more like the reception, the transmission, the tradition, that kind of stuff. So it's one of the things that's said about Kabbalah is that it was an oral tradition, and the oral tradition predates it being written down. There's nothing really, in my opinion, at least historically, to substantiate that. Now, that doesn't mean that people weren't, speculating and contemplating, and there wasn't any kind of oral tradition. As a matter of fact, most ancient traditions, particularly spiritual or initiatic, which indeed, studying religions can be, right? In order to get into a religion, there's usually typically initiations like circumcision, baptism, certain rites that you have to perform. But there's nothing that suggests to me that it was as firmly delineated and specifically Judaic as is claimed. As a matter of fact, I find more evidence for there being a pre-existing system what we would nowadays consider Kabbalah in ancient Greece and the Hellenized world and Greco-Egyptian, Roman, Alexandria. Really, there is much more of a tradition because the Kabbalah with a K stems essentially from a tremendous group of writings called the Zohar, which was written in, I believe, the 1300s by Moses de Leon, and I think it was in Toledo, Spain. But anyway, so kind of this medieval Spanish, interpreter and mystic writes these things down and essentially creates this Zoharic tradition, which is the beginning of real Kabbalistic exegesis. Now, there's one other text called the Sefer Yetzirah, and that's and technically there can be a third one, the Sefer HaBahir, the book of illumination or book of brightness. The Sefer Yetzirah is the book of formation, the book of creation, really, and it basically it's a shorter treatise than the volumes of the Zohar, but it basically corresponds the creation of the material universe to the letters of the Hebrew alphabet. And that comes from this whole idea where, like, when God in Genesis makes things, he doesn't make it with his hands, he says it. God said, let there be light. And there was light.
And when you speak about I think you said the Book of Light, was that another Hebrew text or was that in a different language, or what was that about?
No, that's another Hebraic text. It's another sort of mystical, rabbinical take on that stuff. It's a lesser work, I would say, but still good. Now, even within, so in other words, capital K Kabbalah is the Jewish Kabbalah. It's specifically Hebrew, Hebraic. It falls within a rabbinical lineage. And essentially, sorry, my camera is kind of messing.
All good. Your audio is still okay. Cool.
So we have the capital K Kabbalah. It's specifically Hebrew, specifically Judaic. And even within that, right, because it spans a really long time, even though, the extant historical texts bring us back to the 1300s or 1400s, that's still a long time, right, from then till now, right? So there's a lot of different Hebraic or Judaic or rabbinical schools, right? There are different schools. There's Sabbatai,
Zevi?
There's Sabbatian Kabbalism, there's Lurianic Kabbalism, there's Ibrahim Abulafia had his own interpretation, which was brilliant, of the Kabbalah, which Seekers of Unity, I think Zev from that channel, he did a really good thing on it. I'm more of a Lurianic guy because that's really where the Golden Dawn stuff, the capital Q Kabbalah kind of comes in, that initiatic system. Now there are rumors that, like, the Golden Dawn also has to do with the Sabbatean Kabbalah, but I don't see it. And there's been a lot of exegesis on it. From where I stand in the Zalater Adeptus minor grade, I could absolutely be proven wrong as you go further, but I don't see it. To me, it's like, it doesn't matter that Westcott or Mathers were reading that stuff. What is present in the philosophy of the order system? And to me, it's the Lurianic Cabala with the Tikkun HaOlam and all that sort of stuff. But you see, it's easy to go off and digress on this because this is a labyrinthian subject. This is a tremendous subject. But so and then you have later on in the Renaissance, really, you guys like Athanasius Kircher, but principally Pico della Mirandola. You also have Johannes Reuchlin. He did great work, but Pico della Mirandola, he was very influential because he was a close associate and friend of Marsilio Ficino, who during the Medici dynasty in Florence translated the works of Plato, the works of Aristotle,
and the Hermetica, right?
The Corpus Hermeticum, the works of Plotinus. He did all these things. He brought us, almost single-handedly brought us the Renaissance. This at the behest of his patron Cosimo de' Medici. So Pico was a little bit younger, and his thing was that he studied with like this anonymous or unidentified, very mysterious character. He was a rabbi, an Italian rabbi, I believe. And he taught him how to read and write in Hebrew, and essentially taught him the Kabbalah. And when Pico found the Kabbalah, he basically said, my God, this is a filing system for, all of polytheism. But more importantly, this is almost a mathematical proof for the Christ. And so therein, with works of Johannes Reuchlin, who I believe he met during his lifetime, and then Athanasius Kircher, and then going further, you have Nor von Rosenroth, who wrote Kabbalah Denudata, or Kabbalah Unveiled, which was translated by Mathers in the 1800s at the behest of Westcott. But those guys, that group of scholars, and most of them, if not all of them, were theologians. They were monks. They had ordination. They had orders. So they created essentially a Christian interpretation that is Kabbalah with a C. We call that the Christian Kabbalah. It was primarily from those works that the scholars and lay researchers of the 1800s began to cobble together, and the 1700s, right? You definitely had in French occultism, you definitely had a very strong Kabbalistic influence in the Elu Cohens of Martina de Pasquale. You see it's all over Martinism now. Eliphas Levi was talking about it. So, even earlier than the end of the 1800s, because he was writing, I believe, in the 1830s, the 1850s. This Christian Kabbalistic framework was essentially exhumed or resurrected, or you know what, it wasn't dead because it was still being worked in Hebraic, like rabbinical communities, but it was pulled out of, or pulled further out of its kind of like theological milieu and brought to application in a much broader use. So they began using it with Antoine Coeur de Gébelin and Atelier, those Frenchmen, I believe in the 1700s or 1800s. They were talking about the tarot and its correspondences and to the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet, which basically that's what the Sefer Yetzirah, is talking about, these formative letters. So they brought it to bear on everything, and they made it available for anyone who wants to study occultism, and they kind of updated it to fit with a broader understanding, right? Because when you take something out of this niche milieu, you kind of expose it again to the light of day. And, people who have been working a particular system, and you find it in magical orders today, and you see there's no better example than academia. But you get people who are they're just drilling things over and over, head in the books, and they're kind of not able to see the forest for the trees. They're hyper specifying. It's a hyper niche. And so it becomes logically absurd. Meaning that their logic starts to take on these it folds in on itself. And you do see that a lot in a lot of the Kabbalistic exegesis, the Zoharic interpretations and stuff like that. Sometimes you read it and you're like, what? This logic, of course, only makes sense to people in that, contemplative Judaism, so, and it's not that it doesn't have value. There's a tremendous amount of value, but there's just some stuff where it's like, you guys have been looking at this for too long. Well, somebody is blasting AC/DC on a motorcycle. Sorry.
No worries. It seems like it's not picking up it. So
okay, good. That's good. Because it made the window shake. But anyway, So then that's capital Q Kabbalah. Now you have this kind of interpretation from a magical point of view. Really, it gets combined with Hermetism in the Kabbalah. It becomes the Hermetic Kabbalah, and that's really when you're reading Dion Fortune. When you're reading Crowley. I hope you're not reading Crowley, but there's something to learn from everybody. Book 4 was good. Not going to knock it. And from what have you, that generation of occultists, you're reading capital Q Kabbalah. So that's the basic delineation. For anybody that wants to go a little deeper in that stuff, obviously I've done a good amount of work on that in my introduction to Kabbalah series, and also and some of the tarot stuff that I've done, because that's very much linked to the Kabbalah in capital Q Kabbalah. So I've done some of that stuff on my channel, on the Arcanum channel. You can check that out if you want to go deeper.
Really? Well, I want to start out with Gematria, and I wanted to read a passage first and then kind of get your thoughts. So it's out of this specific book that I was speaking to in the beginning. So it says, those who argue for the validity of Gematria seldom advance such embarrassing examples. Far more popular are such numerical identities as quote-unquote love and unity, which both equal 13. In any event, the correspondences are always interesting. It should be pointed out that numerology of this kind works equally well with any alphabet and any language. If one assigns numbers to letters of the English alphabet from 1 to 26 consecutively, one may arrive with little experimentation at any number of astounding numerical correspondences. For example, quote-unquote Jesus and quote-unquote Messiah both add to 74. Jesus is 10 plus 5 plus 19 plus 21 plus 19, or 74. Messiah is 13 plus 5 plus 19 plus 19 plus 9 plus 1 plus 8, or 74. Incidentally, the English word quote-unquote God in this system adds to 26, the same as Yahweh, YHVH in Hebrew. One may therefore argue that Gematria, and in fact all numerology, is the purest nonsense. On the other hand, one may take such phenomena as proof that it does have validity. In any case, it is doubtless a mistake to take it too seriously or carry it too far. Doing so can result in the grossest delusions. Nevertheless, numerology does form an interesting exercise that enhances the thinking process, or at least one aspect of the thinking process, so on and so forth. It goes on. But I definitely do see within this realm of Gematria a lot of, people getting ridiculously carried away with it these days. But yeah, I wanted to get kind of your take on Gematria, maybe its value, its application, your overall thoughts on Gematria.
Well, it kind of harkens back to what I was saying about people being so involved and invested in one thing for so long that it's like it becomes absurd. A lot of Kabbalists, even capital Q Kabbalists, would be like, "What's this guy talking about? He doesn't know what he's, like, how can he claim to be an initiate if he's not into? He just doesn't understand. He doesn't understand the significance." I understand the significance. It's you're toggling your worldview at that point, but it is absurd. From a certain perspective, it's completely absurd. The thing is that it goes back to that cliche. There are two ways to look at the world: as if everything is a miracle and as if nothing is miraculous. And, we definitely have gone really far in one direction. But in terms of like our modern society, and I think that, the pendulum swings an equal amount in the opposite direction, ultimately. So it's like these words have to mean something because the simulation I'm taking part in has an ultimate intelligence underlying it. And so therefore there is no such thing as coincidence. There is no such thing as chance. And, what's really difficult, I think what is really hairy territory is when you take any text as like plenary authority on like the absolute authority of either God literally wrote this through prophets and stuff like that. I tend to take a little bit more of, I don't want to say materialist, because I'm definitely not. I do, I spent a long time in that world of like, well, everything's speaking to me, and it's true. It's true in a certain way. It's true in a certain way. It is true, but you cannot live like that forever, because it does lead to delusion. You need some kind of. That's why Hermetic magic is supposed to be an art and a science. There has to be some component where you're testing it, where you're skeptical. That to me is the biggest issue with pop spirituality, is that it becomes this thing where it's like, yes, everything is miraculous, but you also have to understand we live in the realm of two truths, right? In the ancient Egyptian Book of the Dead, it was like the word that they used for the hall of truth was actually plural. It was the hall of truths, the hall of two truths. And so even though everything is miraculous, everything is also dead and terrifying, and it will consume you. Yeah. So, both of those things are true. So you can't act like both of them aren't at the same time. You have to, and that is the trickiest thing to do. That is an alchemical marriage. It's not but it's a lesser kind of stage of alchemical marriage, is blending the objective and the subjective and saying like, oh, these are both true at the same time. It's never either or, but so Gematria is interesting. I think that a lot of value can be extracted in certain instances. I think that you have to look at the historical and cultural milieu from which texts are ultimately, they come from. And you have to say, okay, were these writers actually writing with this in mind? And if that's the case, then examine it under that scope. And I think when things like that occur synchronistically for you in your life, then that's something you should be at least looking at. But to sit there and fish through it, like I remember this book in like either the late 90s or like early 2000s, but this guy Michael Drosnin claimed to like find this like biblical cipher that like, or computers found it or something, and it's like predicting the future, and he went down like this crazy rabbit hole of like assassinations and Israeli politics, and it was called the Bible Code. And to me, that was just a modern version of what these Hebrew mystics have been doing with Gematria for centuries. It's like I don't think this, I don't think the entire thing was written sort of like miraculously through literally by the hand of God, and that everything corresponds to everything else. I think that is a logical absurdity, meaning that like it has its own logic, but that logic is absurd. It conforms to itself. But I don't necessarily find it completely fruitless. Like I said, there are certain instances when it works, particularly if you're an initiate. If you're an initiate in a modern kind of iteration of the Golden Dawn, or let's say, God bless you, Thelema, or even Aurum Solis. So like a lot of those rituals, like culled off of the Golden Dawn stuff specifically, they put in the Gematria. They're in the rituals. It's there for a reason. They're trying to point you towards it. They have made a connection which is of value, which is significant. Okay. And you can't deny that, because they have intentionally found that and put it in a ritual. They're not just interpreting, that they have an underlying finger that they're trying to point, and like, look here, this is what this is supposed to mean. So in that case, you would want to defer to that and look for those things and really come to understand it. But it's not that I think it's useless or even wrong. It's just you will undoubtedly be led to delusion. Like it's like A Beautiful Mind or that Charlie Day meme. You're making connections that aren't necessarily there. I think that's the inevitable eventuality of that situation. But that said, I still use it every once in a while. I use it synchronistically. When I see something that corresponds and relates to something that I'm dealing with or thinking about or mulling over, or an energy that I'm working with, I'm like, okay, this is cool, this is important. So I'd rather use personal synchronicity to guide me rather than trying to figure out this objective, quote unquote, cipher in scriptural texts.
Definitely. All right, so I'm going to read another passage and I'll ask a question and get your thoughts.
One second. I just want to add one thing. There was a version of Gematria that preceded it. It was called Isopsephy, coming from the Greek isopsephos, equal pebbles. And they were doing this stuff in ancient Greece as a form of like numerical reduction of words. So yeah, I guess I should have started with what Gematria was, but just briefly, it's when in most scriptural languages, particularly Greek and Hebrew, they didn't have numbers. They had letters that represented their numbers. And so Gematria or Isopsephy is also called in modern kind of capital Q Kabbalism, theosophic reduction. You take the letters that are next to each other and you add them, and you want to get to a single digit. And then that number will say something, especially based on correspondences, what have you, in terms of Pythagorean mathematics, or having to do with the mathematics of the or the mathematical metaphysics of the tree of life. So
okay. All right. So one small variation noted in the entries of this encyclopedia is the astrological attributions and Hebrew spellings of the names of the spirits of the Goetia, the mystical magical order of the Aurum Solis, as an alternative system that is of sufficient importance to be taken into account. As concerns the angels of the Shem HaMephoresh, however, the Aurum Solis uses the name attributes as the Golden Dawn and Crowley, attributing the first such angel to the first quintance of Leo rather than Aries, according to MacGregor Mathers, who wrote the bulk of the materials used by the Golden Dawn. The zodiac should start at 0% Leo rather than 0% Aries, and he defined the star Regulus as being exactly at 0% Leo. Consequently, at least as far as the Golden Dawn is concerned, the astrological attributions of both the demons of the Goetia and the angels of the Shem HaMephoresh start at 0% Leo. So this one, I just was curious as to your perspective as this sort of, like, in your opinion, is that an accurate assessment, the 0% Leo? And is this related to like the Anima Mundi?
I guess it could be related to the Anima Mundi, but in a certain way. But I think more so, I get why Mathers would do that, right? I mean, his order was called the Golden Dawn, right? And Leo is the domicile of the sun. It's technically the sun at its zenith, but in terms of the arrangement of the angelic powers, it all depends on what you're doing, and how you're viewing this stuff, right? Because the thing is, you talk about the quinances, and you talk about the decans and things like this. And you talk about the Shem HaMephoresh. You're essentially talking about, again, the permutation of letters. That's what this is. So in other words, an angel from these perspectives is not like this. I mean, it has this objective quality to it, but that objective, those characteristics and those qualities change as you permutate the letters. The letters are the defining, we call them, like talismanic or really Yetziratic images. Are the composition of the power as embodied by the letters. So to me, when you're talking about stuff like this, it's not something that I am like very particular about theoretically. It just I would say that anybody that has any bonus to pick with either or systems, use what works well for you, or try both, try another, and see what happens, as long as you're not going completely out of bounds and you start playing with permutations that could get dangerous. But essentially, that is, again, going back to the Sefer Yetzirah, talking about the Hebrew letters as so much more, there's some symbolic of divine powers that created the universe. God created the universe in these 22 powers, these 22 permutations, these 22 letters. And, a lot of that, I think, has to do with speech being a command at times. Speech is not only the product of thought, it has the potential to direct thought. And ultimately, right, and I'm not even sure that that anciently, this was something they took into account, but I still find it very significant, is that words are predicated on vibration. And so is all matter. All matter is energy vibrating. So it's, to me, it's, 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. The thing to focus on is practicum. Praxis is like, okay, if you're going to do these things, astrologically timed, try it for yourself. If you're going to start when the sun is at 0 degrees or 1 degree Leo, and then you kind of go around invoking these angels at different times. Give it a shot and see what happens. If there's anything, because it's an extremely long operation if you're doing it based on days and astrologically where the sun is and stuff like that. But so there's plenty of time for you to realize, like, this isn't working. But that's I guess that's really my take on it. I don't. There's some things I don't split hairs about, because as anybody who has listened to me will know, I'm more about putting it into practice. And so, like, I've met, especially in the last couple of weeks, it's been really crazy. Right, Venus retrograde, maybe. I have no idea really what's going on, but I've met people that just want to intellectually box. It's like, oh, we're like, I'll go into it under the assumption that we're having a very casual, friendly conversation, and it becomes this, and it's fun for them. It's not fun for me, but they're having an intellectual wrestling match and they want to do it every day. And it's just like, for fuck's sake, man, that's not what this is about. That we're back into the escapist territory again. If your job in the occult is to, like, have the perfect system and have, get everything dialed in and get it just right, it's like, well, good luck, because if there's anything that you should be learning as an esotericist, it's that the world is imperfect. There's no perfect, there's no alignment where it's like you get the fucking, when you use those lockers in like high school and you got to like turn it 3 times and get it just dialed in on the right, little line there. That's not how it works in real life. Like, right. The experience of reality actually has nothing the fuck to do with that. So, I don't, I guess all that to say, I'm not going to split hairs over something like that.
Yeah, for sure. It kind of reminds me of like all of the various different like martial arts systems or something. There's like wrestling, boxing, jiu-jitsu, whatever, taekwondo, whatever, all these various systems of different fighting styles. And then you kind of learn under those systems. And then once you become proficient in the various systems, then you can kind of utilize and combine each one to do the best you can in terms of an actual fight or something along those lines. It kind of reminds me of all these different various systems and their differences and whatnot. But
yeah, and that's the interesting thing, because what you're talking about is essentially assimilating something into yourself. Right. That's what martial arts does. You assimilate the movements. That's why you practice these things, ad infinitum or ad nauseum. Really, you're just going over and over and you're like, what am I going to use this for? And then one day, something happens, I don't know, something's falling or somebody kind of like did play boxing with you, and your reflexes automatically defer to that particular movement because you've trained them, like, as I like to say, the way water trains rock, and it is assimilated. You're doing the same thing when you invoke the angels of the Shem HaMephoresh. That's the whole point of this theurgic magic, this angelic magic, is not to say I speak with angels. Okay, asshole. Like, that's why you're not supposed to talk about this stuff, because like you think you sound fucking cool, and the 4 idiots you're walking around in nemesis and robes with think that's really fucking cool, but nobody else on earth does. Okay, so it's like you first of all keep silence on your experiences. They're for you. That's your guidebook. Nobody the fuck else's. But then at the same time, you're assimilating these things into yourself, into your sphere of sensation. Yeah. That's the whole point, is to awaken the divine powers in you, and to what we call in Hermetism, or really Hermeticism. Hermetism's dead, but we call it in Hermetic magic the rectification of the sphere of sensation. I want to make my miniature universe, my sphere of sensation, which is a Western term for the more popularly known Eastern aura. I want to rectify that. I need to make that more like the divine plan, and the divine plan is the universe. So I'm going to quote unquote rectify. And those angels, those 72 angels, have a dark reflection of the 72 demons of the Gematria, and that's also part of the universe. But we don't, we want to assimilate that in a certain way too, without that stuff taking over, and that's why you can bring in an angel, you can invoke an angel, right? But I wouldn't invoke a demon. I would evoke a demon into a triangle of art. You bind them.
Oh, okay. So this might be an interesting question. The difference between evocation versus invocation.
Right. Evoke means to call forward, to call forth, right? Like, I'm evoking this thing. I'm saying, you come here. And so you'll come. If I were to call you and tell you to come over, I'd be evoking you, but then invocation is, now I'm inviting you into my magical circle, into my sphere of sensation. And when you invoke a particular power, I mean, especially if it's a god, a deity of some kind, it can, what they call, ride you. And that means that you basically disassociate, and that power has complete control over your consciousness and your physical vehicle. That can be tricky. That can be dangerous. It can be done under the right situations. It's actually a powerful tool for divination. I've done it before, in a group ritual setting. I've done it a couple of times, invocations. But I've been the initiating hierophant in invocations, but dicey, tricky, up to the people who've been doing it for a while and really know what they're doing. So invocation is in, right? Starts with in. It's telling you I'm allowing it in. Evocation is I'm calling you forward in front of me. And when you do that in goetic magic or grimoire magic, you're calling them into a space that is set aside for them, and it's typically a triangle. They call that the triangle of art, and it binds them by divine names. And then you would use a properly consecrated ritual implement, typically some kind of sword, to basically threaten and command and bind them. Binding is the most important thing. Now, I said earlier that's what I would do. I was talking about that's what I would do in terms of technique and sequencing protocol. I wouldn't invoke a demon. I wouldn't evoke a demon. I have no desire to do that in my ritual work. If you're doing that, something is, unless there are certain instances where I could see that being beneficial. But if you're calling forth demons to like get you a new car, you are fucked. You need to stop. You need to stop. You need to sit down, take a cold fucking bath. Somebody's got to slap you in the mouth. Really, don't do that stuff. That's my take on that.
Yeah, definitely. So when I'm kind of going through this encyclopedia, there's obviously it's just tons of different names and intelligences and all sorts of stuff. And a lot of things will say, like, for example, there's one Adamiron, and then it gives the Hebrew letters for it. It says the bloody ones, comma, Quilpoth of Taurus. So in your understanding, like, you like many names are attributed like this, where it says the Qliphoth of X on constellation. So are there like separate Qliphos or trees of death and or upright trees of life for each zodiacal sign and or constellation, or what's up with that?
Well, essentially what it is it's so a Qliphoth, typically, if you're talking about like at least capital Q Kabbalah, as it has been, because it's different in K Kabbalah, in Judaic Hebrew Kabbalah. If you're talking about it in capital Q Kabbalah, anytime you're saying Qliphoth, one usually thinks of the averse tree, the downward tending tree, the inverse tree, which it's essentially adjacent to, it abuts against Malkut and descends downward into densest materiality. It's sort of like an inverted spirit of materiality, or a hylic world, which is not animated to the same extent by divine power as the upright tree is and the realm of Malkuth. And so the light is severely diminished there, if you want to use an analogy, severely diminished. Whereas in Malkuth, it's balanced. There's about an equal amount of light and darkness. In terms of being, in terms of, sort of distal proximity from, the light of Keter and the Ein Sof, the averse tree is really, really far into, that kind of just realm of darkness, the tree of death, right? Sometimes it gets called, but that's not always the case. They're not always thinking of the lineal glyph of the tree of life and its inverse and its inversion when you're talking about, Hebrew Kabbalah. The thing is to delineate, the Qliphoth. Qliphoth, I believe it's now kind of taught that it comes from a misspelling in Genesis, where essentially they were like two extremely similar words for luminaries and versus curses. So Genesis describes the creation of the sun and the moon by God as curses rather than luminaries, right? It should have been luminaries, but there was some kind of spelling mistake. So in the Zoharic tradition, it says, well, this has to have meaning, so maybe there's something here, and it kind of delineates this story of like the moon like degrading and subjecting itself to rectify, like, oh no, it has to mean something. If this was written by God, there are no accidents. Like it wasn't luminary, it was curse. The luminaries are curses. So that I believe is where now it's taught, or at least agreed, that the origin of that, not the word, but the term, the way we use it for these things. Jump, fast forward to I think the 15 or 1600s. You have Rabbi Isaac Luria and his Lurianic Cabala. He was a great rabbi and a tremendous mystic and tremendous man. They called him the Lion, the Ari. But that has messianic connotations to it in Hebrewism, in Judaism. But he talks more about the Qliphoth being husks or shells or like peels, like an orange peel that contains the divine light. And he's got this idea that there was this first creation, and the vessels that these shells that were to hold the light broke. They couldn't handle the force, and the shards remained in densest materiality. On the densest level, the light kind of retracts itself, gathers itself back up to unity, and then it tries again, and it's successful this time. But pieces of the divine light are stuck in these shattered vessels, and they're still there. And so when the projection of or the emanations are sort of projected, it's done so on top of the klipoth, and there's little shards or pieces of the divine light, Shekinah, that are stuck, trapped in these vessels. And so you have the tikkun ha'olam, which is this idea that, like, you know, we have to, or a savior has to, or, you know, we just in general have to rescue pieces of the divine light from the shards of the klipoth. But it's, at the same time, you have the klipoth have a purpose here, right? They're to give form to the divine light. They're to hold it. They're to create the vessels that allow the divine light to be here and to differentiate. So it's almost like this. They're not evil in and of themselves. It's more so they have an exterior relationship to the divine light rather than an interior relationship. And so they necessarily cause this dark reflection. And so that dark reflection is why you have 72 angels and 72 demons. It's why you have, you know, the zodiacal signs and the 12 princes, you know, the 12 dark princes, which are the, you know, the averse zodiacal signs in that klipothic Kabbalah. But essentially, right, it says that the tree of life has branches that tend upwards and downwards. And the difference is that the klipoth insist on the duality of material illusion. That's the main thing. They never concede to a unity. Whereas the upright tree, nothing on that upright tree. Geburah gets a bad rap because people are pussies. You know, it's like you need to learn that you need fucking discipline, you know, and you need to learn that violence is sometimes necessary. You know, unfortunately, it's unfortunate. You should not, you know, revel or joy to any degree to have to do that, but it is necessary in the realm of duality in certain instances, right? You're not going to just sit there and let a child be slaughtered, right? Take me instead. Right. And even still, even though you're not the one doing violence, look around. Look around. Yes, it's a part of the fucking creation. You nuts. You know, like it's part of the whole thing. Just because you're not doing it doesn't mean that it doesn't, like our material reality isn't predicated on it. I mean, you know, like, what do you need to tell a lion to go veg? It's ridiculous, you know. It leads to extinction. That thing has to kill shit and eat it, you know. It's just a part of our reality that violence is necessary. And, you know, if you can't deal with that, you are dissociating yourself from the plan. You are making yourself, you will eventually you will lose touch with reality if you already haven't. To me, if you can't see that violence isn't a part of the creation, then something has already started to go wrong with you. But it doesn't lead good places, because essentially you're rejecting the divine plan, regardless of whether you think it's demiurgic or was, you know, there's some kind of flaw here. It's still here. We still have to deal with it, right? You got to eat the meal that's on the plate in front of me. And you don't do that by rejecting it or conflating it to be something that you wish it were. You have to deal with the reality in order to best understand how to navigate it. And that's the whole idea with the klipoth, is that it's a necessary evil. Now, you see this, again, in Neoplatonism, particularly in the cosmology and theology, really, or cosmogony of Plotinus. He talks about this at length, right? Because it's a huge problem. How is it that a being of light could, or light itself can create darkness? This is the classical problem of evil. And the thing that Plotinus has to say is that highly matter is not evil in and of itself, but it's evil as an end. In other words, so essentially it's the soul's attraction to the material, because the material has that dipole. It is one part of the dipole of the magnetism that pulls the spirit, or pulls the psyche, pulls the soul, right? We'd be talking about what goes on in my head. my experience. That's very much so how they conceived of the psyche, soul, is like me, the unit of me, my kind of internal monad is, I'm either reaching up or I'm reaching down. And that's true, because you never still. The closest you can approximate material reality, where everything is constantly vibrating, constant motion, is the dynamic equilibrium, which is you're not perfectly still. Just this, the sine wave has become very, very rarefied. The movements are very minimal, but you're still moving because you have to. Mm-hmm. There's no such thing as true stasis here. And Plotinus said that, like, if matter itself, which we could equate to the Klipoth, if you're just thinking, like, think of just matter, unilluminated by divine intelligence, by the laws that it has to adhere to, but just matter as substance itself, it will pull you downward. It's going to create this. That's why there's this dichotomy, this struggle internally, like between our conscience and the gratification of the material desires, the impulses, because our consciousness is of the light, but we're in a vessel that is beholden to the decay and death of matter, and therefore matter subjects the divine to the processes of decay and death. It makes the soul experience those things, which are its inherent nature. It can't hold itself together forever the way the light can, self-subsisting. So now my portion of the Shekinah, my portion of the divine light, has to experience death and material impulses, like wanting Taco Bell at 4 a.m, and that's, because I'm not going to tell you all the horrible things I've done, that's just, that's the dichotomy. And so, philosophers like Plato, in his analogy, I think it's in either in the Phaedo or the Phaedrus, I get them mixed up because the names are so similar. That's that analogy of the charioteer and the two horses, one light, one dark. The light one tries to take the high road, the dark one tries to take the low road, and the charioteer, the soul has to kind of figure out how to create equilibrium.
Yeah, it always reminds me of like gravity and levity. I always think a lot about that in terms of like how they relate. So one word I came across is Avir, or ether, and it says, according to some, the Briatic manifestation of Binha and the passive principle of the Shekinah. I was just curious, like what does that mean, the Briatic manifestation?
Sorry, I had a fire truck pass by. Can you just read that quote one more time?
So this word Avir, or ether, says, according to some, the Briatic manifestation of Binha and the passive principle of the Shekinah. And my question, I was just wondering, when it says the Briatic manifestation, what does that mean? What is a Briatic manifestation?
So all things are constantly manifesting on 4 levels, and in Kabbalah they call that